Welcome kindreds, it's Jessica and I've got a fun video for you today. This is something that was requested by one of my channel members, and she wanted me to do a video about how I work with the Weaver's Oracle, because this is a really beautiful deck that I've had I think for a couple of years now. I did do a walkthrough of it when I first got the deck. I've made a couple of videos about this, so I'll try and remember to link all of those other videos as well. It is an independent deck made by an artist and musician here in the UK, and I really love her work and I really enjoy using this deck, but it's a tricky deck to use. It's kind of, and I think that's because there's so many kind of layers and neons to it, and also a little bit because the imagery, like this deck was not created as an oracle deck. Like I think one of the things that people enjoy about oracle decks in general is they're normally quite accessible, you know, they're sort of straightforward. You've got a picture and then the write-up in the book kind of explains what that means and they're quite easy to read. Well, this deck is not like that. It was created as a sequence of paintings, as several sequences of paintings, which she then brought together. Like you'll probably notice that's like the orientation and the kind of size and the structure really of these images. They're separate paintings that she's done over a long period of time, which she's then brought together as a deck. And it doesn't feel like, that sounds like sometimes when they make kind of like compilation decks like that, it can feel a little bit like piecemeal, but this deck is not like that. It very much feels to me like ancestral wisdom in this deck. It feels kind of like goddessy ancestral wisdom type deck. The imagery is very, very potent, and even though it is quite different, they do speak to each other. I'm going to show you a little bit of the book, which I think is the reason why this deck is quite hard to work with. But basically, I'm going to talk about how I use this and how I have kind of cracked the code of it. I don't really want to say it like that because obviously, you know, we each have our own way of working with decks. We each have our own approach to this. And I'm sure different people using this deck would be working with it in a different way than I am. But I find a lot of people do find this deck difficult. So I want to offer some ideas for working with this, some kind of like ways in. And also I think like even if you don't have this deck, if you've got an oracle deck that you are kind of struggling with accessing or just working with oracle decks in general, then I think a lot of the stuff I share will also be relevant to other decks as well. So it's not just the Weaver's Oracle, but I'm going to focus just on the Weaver's Oracle in this video. But like I say, some of the ideas will be relevant for other decks as well. So this is the guide you get with it. It comes in like a nice book box and everything when it comes. It's very different from what you expect from a lot of oracle cards. So let me show you some of the stuff that's in here. So we've got like an index of the card, so that's kind of straightforward. A little bit of an introduction to the whole lot of the cards, but this is where it starts to get a little bit, well, she gives some ideas herself about this, and I think it's worth reading through this and kind of seeing how Carolyn suggests working with these cards as well, and how you might want to work with these women, these weavers here. But this is what is interesting about this. It's got different levels of neon. So we've got clans and tribes in this deck. So we've got the Guardian clan, the Earth clan, you know, we've got these different types of clans, and then there's also the directions as well. So that some of the cards are from the East Weavers, for the South Weavers, the West Weavers, and the North Weavers. So there's like almost like suits. I don't want to say it's like suits exactly, but there is definitely you know, like the East Weavers tend to be like a little bit more airy, younger, kind of more beginning energy, initiation energy, and then the South Weavers tends to be more kind of fiery, more south energy, that kind of warmth. Like here it says like wedding dances, domestic hearths, you know, is that kind of fire energy. The West Weavers, that's with the sunset, you know, so it's got that kind of like autumn energy, that watery energy of like you know, relationships, emotional stuff. And then the North Weavers is the pentacles, the earth element, you know. So we've got, it's not perfectly like that in the suits, you know, like they don't necessarily relate exactly like that, but I think one way in, especially if you're used to working with tarot, is to take note of the tribe that the weaver that you're working with comes from. And then obviously like the clans as well, they do give you like a little bit of information, but they are a little bit more esoteric. And that is this guidebook in general. It just is kind of esoteric. It has, you know, this is like the map of who's in what clan, and then who is in each of the tribes. So you can kind of see it all laid out like that, which I think is like, I didn't use this first of all when I was using this deck. I was working like with one card at a time, but once I started to realize, okay, I see now, you know, there's the directions are here as well, and we've got these different clans adding that other level of nuance and stuff into it. It kind of does make sense as a coherent entity. And then here, okay, so for every single weaver, so I'll show you this one, and then I'll shuffle maybe, and we'll draw a weaver, and I'll show how I might work with what is in the book. So you get, so up here, when you on every page of the weaver is set out the same. They've each got like 2 pages in the guidebook. It tells you their clan, and then it tells you their direction, and it's got the name. So this one is number 1, Kindle, Shaman Weaver of Earth. She is Guardian of the Hearth. So it gives you quite a lot of information, I think. Just like if you just sit with that first of all, you know, especially like, okay, Guardian clan, so we know she's kind of like the kind of core clan of the deck, and then an East Weaver, so we know it's that kind of kindling, initiatory energy, that, well, like air initiatory energy, I should say. And then it's separated, so we've got her yarn, and the yarn is a story. It's a story in which the weaver that we find on the card is kind of introduced to us. And what I think the best way to think about this when you're thinking about the yarn is, if you notice when you look at these cards, is that they're very kind of, well, you know, they're just a black background. So it's like the weaver, like sometimes they do have what they're weaving here, but a lot of the time, like this is the exception, more of the exception to the rule. There are some that are like this, where there is a little bit of detail, of like kind of background detail with, you know, we've got some grass here, but most of them are very, this again is like another exception to the rule. Most of them are like this, you know, they're kind of, there's no background. And the way that I tend to think about the yarn is it kind of fills in the background. Is so like when you read the story of the yarn, it gives you the context for the image. So say we were working with 32 Moon, when we read her yarn, that fills in the background. So you can kind of imagine the background around this, the context around this weaver. And then we've got the braid, which is a little bit like how you kind of work. So think about it as weaving. So when you've got the yarn, you've got the thread, haven't you? The thread, and that's the story thread. And then the braid is when you start to kind of bring it together. It meets into other things. So you can see how that bit kind of feeds into the different layers and levels of the. I'll use an example in a minute, and we'll work through it, and you'll see better what I'm trying to say, because this might sound like a little bit like this is not helpful at the moment, but it does. Brings in some connections then in the braid in that section here. And then the cloth is like kind of the output, and I find the cloth is almost like the divinatory meaning perhaps, and it often offers quite practical suggestions as well of things that you might want to work with. But it is very esoteric. Let's shuffle and let's use one, because I think that'll be the best way of doing it. And when I first got this deck, I used just one weaver. I worked with just one weaver for a whole year. And then I started to draw weavers for each moon cycle. So every new moon, I would draw a new weaver as part of my new moon ritual to work with for the coming moon cycle. And I found that a really good way of getting to know them, because I felt like there was so much work with just one weaver that I couldn't contemplate really like having several weavers kind of together to work with. These are obviously very big cards as well, which makes them kind of tricky to shuffle. But now, as I've got more used to using this deck, I do use them sometimes. Well, I say I'm still not really using them in combination. Like I'm not doing a spread or anything with these cards. I mean, obviously you could do that, But I have, for this year, when I pulled my year ahead, I took cards for each month and I used the weavers and pulled a weaver for each month. And so I feel like I've got 12 weavers now, almost as like a council of elders or a council of weavers for me to interact with as I go through the year. So I feel like even though each of them are kind of coming more to focus at the beginning of each month, in the month that I'm working with them, it's actually the case that all of them are present for my whole journey this year. So I've kind of got this council of weavers for the whole year. So that is one way that I'm working with these cards. I also, like, I've given some other ideas before about like recording the yarn and listening to that as a meditation, and we'll go into some of those details of that as we look at it now. So this is the card that has come out. We've got 48, card number 48. There's 52 weavers in here altogether. Shard. So, you know, shard. Okay, so it's like a piece of something. And she's Shaman Weaver of Tundra. So let's have a look what it says about shard in our guidebook. And I think, like, a couple of people have said, somebody else over in my Facebook group, there's like kind of parts of this channel, like attached to this channel, asked about like sort of said basically the guidebook is very hard to understand, and it is, you know, it is hard to understand, but I think because I just love the metaphor and I'm just here for it, you know, it doesn't spell things out for you. So you do have to kind of like lean into it. So let me try and explain what you mean. So it's number 48 is shard, Shaman Weaver of Tundra. Okay, so Weaver of Tundra. Tundra is like the kind of almost like wilderness, isn't it? It's like the bare landscapes, and she weaves 1,000 reindeer souls. So we've got this kind of idea of cold, you know, we've already got that kind of tundra, barren landscape kind of thing. She's part of the loom clan, which are the ones that have the looms. Let me read you the little section. You can do this, you can just go back. So the loom clan are the ancient sisters of this clan sit around a great life weaving, worked upon a vast bowl-shaped loom. They weave the spirits of mountains, river, forest, tundra, ocean, and other wild lands of the world. Their cloth carries all the textures, colours, and patterns of the earth. Their name, Shaman Weavers, means the primordial mothers who work around the sacred fire. For them, the belly of the loom becomes the mystic hearth. They work to braid, bind, trim, and unwind the mysteries of the woven cloth in order to catch and define for us what it means to be women of spirit in the ancient land. They gather the threads of an old magic that is simple, huge, healing, infinitely flexible, and universally shared. It belongs to all women who wish to hold it. And then it tells us a little bit about the loom. The shaman weaving loom was created over 4 years. Each loom cloth was made before the weaver came to sit at her place around the rim. So she painted the cloths first. We can see the reindeer antler here as well, and the mittens, you know, and the skins, you know. It's when you can place her in the landscape, and part of the loom is that, you know, is that idea of weaving the landscape, weaving the ancestors of those landscape. And yeah, and I just love how she talks about her process of how she created those as well. But if we look at the loom clan on the oracle map, we can see here, so we've got 48, which is like the last one. We've got 3 east, 3 south, 3 west, 3 north. So all of these in the loom clan are weaving like their different areas, and they're also weaving their different elements. So she's in the north clan, in the north weavers. So we know that means she comes from, oh, let me show you that little section, that kind of north earth energy. So she's even more, even though all of the loom clan are kind of weaving that connection with earth, she's even more so than, you know, she's like earth, if that makes sense. The ancient sisters, oh, that's the loom clan. Where's the, oh, here we go. So the tribe of the North Weavers. The North Weavers share the dark and wintry elements because it is that north, it is that dark part of the year. It's like the kind of dark moon and new moon part of the year as well. A weaver's shuttle held in our hands. We yearn for the yarn and we follow the braid. We search for the truth in the cloth as it's made. I love it. I just love it so much. So already, without even reading any of her information, just by knowing her clan and that she's a North Weaver, we know she's one of these ancient archetypes of women who weave the landscape into being, who kind of weave the stories of the people around her. An ancient mother, a primordial mother, you know, when she's a loom, when she works on the loom, when she's part of the loom clan. And she's a North Weaver, so she's got that earth, that kind of practical, earthy, grounded, wintry, cold, wintry element to her as well, you know. And like we can see that when we look at what she's wearing, she's wrapped up warm. She's got skins, you know, furs around her, and then we've got her gorgeous part of the loom where we can see some of the patterns, which almost look kind of like reindeer-like as well. Some of the like antler-like, some of these pictures and patterns that are in the cloth here. So let's read her yarn and see what else we can add as the kind of context for this card, and how we can extrapolate from that a divinatory meaning, like, because that's the point, isn't it? Like when we're working with cards, we want to know, like, well, what does this mean? what relevance has it got for me? How do I use this information in a kind of practical way to tell me what I need to do, or tell me what I need to change? That's why we use cards a lot of the time, isn't it? It's because we want to interact with the meanings. It's not just like oh, that's an interesting story, you know. It needs to be personally relevant. So I'm going to show you how I would try and find that kind of personal relevance in the story. So let's have a look. Varga's clan were travelling hard towards the distant north and suffering many difficulties upon their trail. But they were driven forward by a pressing urgency, as if something extraordinary was waiting for them in the north. And on their way, their imagination started to awaken to the spirits of the landscape through which they moved. As they travelled, the women made songs that captured the sounds of wind and ice and snow, as well as their own weariness and hunger and resolve. At last, Varga's clan came to the great glacial wall. There was no more land on which to walk, for they had reached the farthest edges of the world. They made a small fire, then, all through the long night, they sang their hearts out into the snow. In the grainy dusk of day, they were still singing. They wanted their songs to reach the glacier, to let the edge of the world know that they were there. But their songs were too small for that vast landscape and fluttered down onto the snow like broken birds. Varga sat beneath the moon. She filled her water bag with snow and placed it by the fire to melt. She thought about the belly of the moon and the belly of the bag, and knew what they must do to send their songs out beyond the edge. So Varga's clan went hunting. They chased and caught a winter creature, then set its soul to run towards the sun. They stripped and scraped the hide, tied it on a birchwood frame, and stretched the skin until it formed a flat, tight belly. The first drum. When the drum was dry, Varga picked up a bone and raised her arm. The bone crashed on the drum. The noise filled up the land, and vibrations circled out towards the glacial edge. Varga's clan began to sing. The rhythm of the drum lifted their songs on winds of sound out to the ice mountain. They sang through 9 days and 9 nights before one of Varga's clan shouted in alarm. Everyone stopped singing as they peered across the edge of the world. In the distance, dark shapes were approaching, pulsing in the swirling snow, blurred patches of movement on the ice. The shapes settled into walking forms, and still the drum was sounding as the ancient ice mothers reached them. And that moment was both terrible and great. Varga's clan felt the ice mothers pressing all around them, slipping like smooth icicles into their heads, freezing their hearts. Varga kept on drumming, though her hands were clawed with cold. Now the ice mothers were melting through their bodies and into the hearts of Varga's clan. The hearts of Varga's clan were beating once again. They were all changed and changing. The ice mothers were in them, now part of their own story, which would travel from the edges of the world back to the hearth. Varga lowered her arm, and the first drum was silent. That silence filled with songs waiting to be sung. Wow. So Carolyn is an artist. She could have painted some of that scene around the shaman weaver of tundra, but like, I know they say a picture paints 1,000 words, but I think sometimes with words, like a picture is still static, you know, in its, however great an artist you are, you can create an impression of movement, but I don't think you'd be able to get all of that yarn into the picture. And so I see this as her, you know, this is her story. And what is that story? Like, that when we come into the divinatory meaning, we're like, what is that story about? And for me, that story is about women together on a journey. They've traveled to the edges of the earth. They've traveled as far as they can go. And then when they get there, they feel like there's no further they can go. So what they do then is they stop and they send their songs instead to let the edge of the world know that they're there, which is a beautiful image. And then the songs are not powerful enough. Even the songs of all those women together are not powerful enough. They're songs that they already know. And so instead of that, doing something that they already know, they need to bring something new. They need to birth something new. And in order to do that, they kill an animal, they sacrifice an animal. So there is sacrifice involved. And then with that sacrifice, they are able to birth the very first drum of the world. You know, the Loom clan are these primordial mothers that were there at the very beginning. And so they birth this drum. And then when they start beating on the drum with a bone as their drumstick, it shakes through to the mountains, and the spirits of the land, the ice spirits of that land, hear them, and they come to them and enter into them, first of all like kind of overpowering them, but then melting kind of with them, melding with them, creating something new, something that has changed all. It's changed the kind of the spirits who were there, the spirits of that land of the ice, and it's changed the human women who journeyed out to the edge of the world. And that transformation, which came with sacrifice and birth, has now allowed that kind of bond to happen, and then that new learning can be taken home. It can be taken back to the hearth, and the new songs. He's created space for new songs to be made, as well as creating the first drum as well. So from a divinatory point of view, if I pulled this card when I was looking for like guidance, or maybe as my monthly card, I would be thinking, okay, perhaps where am I feeling like I've traveled as far as I can go? In which part of my life do I feel like I've kind of hit a wall of ice, like there's no progress beyond this point? And perhaps I've got to that point and I'm trying things, you know, I'm trying the things that I already know. I'm trying the kind of tactics and skills that I already know. That's what the songs are, beating against this wall to try and break it down so I can actually get, like kind of meet what I'm supposed to meet there. But the things that I already know are not going to take me there. They can only take me as far as I've already gone. So what needs to happen is there needs to be a sacrifice, an offering or a sacrifice, and something new needs to be brought forward from that sacrifice in order for me to be able to catalyze that change that is needed in order for me to move forward in that part of my life. Do you see what I mean? So you know, they're all very powerful stories like this, and they're all very deep and nuanced. And usually, you know, like if I pulled this, I'd be like, oh yes, I know the icy land that I am in now, and this glacial wall that I am trying to get through, to penetrate, and I can't. And so when I read this story, I'm like, okay, this is what it's telling me I need to do. It's telling me that I need to birth this new thing in order to, I need to let something go. I need to bring something in, this new, in order to make this change. And that it might be kind of like scary, you know, terrible and great. But that is something worthwhile that I am attempting to do. So that is what I do with the yarn. And you know, I normally I'll journal this. I won't just kind of like read it and think, oh yeah. Sometimes I'll read it and it'll be like immediately obvious exactly what it is, but I find, especially if you're working with these over a longer period of time, that it's something that I want to come back to as well. And when I read it again and again, or like I say, it's really lovely if you record it and then you can listen to it almost like a meditation, and it takes you on that journey, and you get kind of aha moments then, you know, as you're listening. It's like, oh, that's it. And I think sometimes even just listening to the story, like for me to sit with this particular story, I would want to get my drum out. I have got a high drum which I made, and beating that drum whilst contemplating this story is something that I think would also, you know, I'd be like, okay, what are the kind of practical things I can do to help it kind of embed this story, to kind of draw out the wisdom, to, like, as if it's a sponge and I'm squeezing out the goodness that is inside it, and I can then understand it. So it's not immediately obvious, and that I think is one of the wonderful things about this deck, is that it doesn't hand it to us on a plate. We have to kind of work, and so many of the stories are about that. It's like, so many of the stories are about, okay, in order to do the next thing, this is the work that needs to be done. And the work of this story is that kind of like cold, painful kind of sacrifice and learning that needs to be made. Okay, so let's have a look at her braid. Her braid. Perhaps only when the travelling woman has absorbed the heart drums of her ancient mothers into her own pulsing veins can she come to fully know herself. So, you know, it's given us, it's like pulling that home, really, isn't it? It's like, okay, yes, that's what I thought I needed to do. I needed to absorb those ice heart drums from the primordial mothers, and then I'll know myself. And that is basically what this is about. You know, it's about seeking knowledge of self. It's about breaking boundaries, about being able to go even further than I can go at the moment. This is the end of the world. Oh, it's not the end of the world. There's more, you know. The ancestors first sang awake the spirits of the land. Their songs have rested undiminished as strands of memory held deep within the primordial belly of the earth and locked into ancient ice. So it's that idea, you know, this cold North Weaver idea of ice frozen. And when we think of water is emotion, then when we have ice, it is frozen emotion. You know, it's stuff that is frozen and hard and impenetrable for us. And like, I'm like, okay, so those are the kind of frozen emotions that I have taken into my own body, into my own heart, and they feel impenetrable to me. I feel like I can't break them down, but that is what this weaver has come to help me with. And it's that beating, that drum, that heart drum, that is going to help to melt that out. Where was I? I got distracted and started talking about it. Those memories emerge as brittle music that drifts in with cold weather, as forgotten rhythms that still pulse through living veins, as old songs carved from frozen air and carried on a northern wind. The frosted tracings of remembered tundra songs are part of the reason why a northward traveller will quest and search, will persist in turning her path beyond familiar terrain, will even follow dangerously unstable routes across the ice whenever the wind blows from the north. So, you know, what it's saying is that it's these frozen and hard places inside us that make us keep searching for more knowledge of self, for more, and that sometimes we'll make bad decisions, you know, we'll follow dangerously unstable routes, but it's because we're carrying this frozen ancient ice within us that we need to find and melt and kind of melt with. The reindeer road is also forged from memory. It is constantly being reconstructed by the songs and prayers placed along its edge by those who have journeyed on it or dwelled beside it, who have lived and died amid its well-worn icy trails. Those ancient morsels have been left for a purpose. All travellers are custodians and bear a responsibility to pick up the scraps of stories they find left behind along the old roads. In carrying those recovered fragments of ancestor lives with them. Travelling women of ancestor lives with them. Travelling women ensure that the reindeer roads continue to exist beneath forgetful layers of time. So having those stories and carrying on telling those stories and finding stories. You know, when I'm reading this one, I'm hearing, okay, a drum is very important to help me to kind of excavate the things that are within me, and to really blend with those ancient mothers. And it's also telling me songs and stories are also the pathway. The road is the reindeer road. So to find my way along the road, I need to be searching for these scraps of wisdom in stories and in songs. And so I will go out and search for those. You know, I will look for songs, perhaps songs about snow, perhaps songs about ice, perhaps songs about the frozen heart, and how you can melt a frozen heart. And like straight away I'll think, okay, yeah, there are stories I know about this. Like there's the story of the Ice Queen, where there's like a shard of ice put in the heart of this boy, and it, you know, it changes him. And there's the girl she searches for him and rescues him. And so that is a story straight away. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that story might be helpful to me in this quest, in this journey that I'm going on to the very edge of the earth. I'm going to need stories, I'm going to need songs, but I'm also going to need my own heart, my own heartbeat, my own pulse beating through all of that. So, you know, it's kind of saying that, isn't it? You know, it's like it does say that. And I suppose all of this is open to interpretation. Like somebody else might read this and think that it means something different, and that's valid too, you know. And that is kind of what is good about it as well. It's like, if it was just like, oh, when you pull this card, it means that you are facing some emotional problems, that have, like some trauma is stuck in your body. You need to release that trauma by perhaps dance or movement or singing. You know, it could say that, couldn't it? But then it would be taking away, by making us do the work for it, by working for it, you're already like setting yourself on that path to be able to release what it is. And so I think that is why it is like this, and it's not just kind of spelled out for us, why don't you do this, you know? Let's have a look at her cloth. When we were girls, we used to play alongside trails and pathways that were part of a mysterious web laid down by ancestors and primordial wild herds across the ancient sacred land. We had no idea. We just thought it was the main road into town. Sometimes as we laughed and ran around together, our imaginary world would be disturbed by other, far stranger, imagined scenes and sounds. But mostly we ignored these intrusions and got on with whatever felt important to us at the time. Of course, we were not to know that we were being regularly exposed to the summoning of old women as they walked a road worn smooth through thousands of years by people following migration routes and pilgrim trails across the land. Time is fairly irrelevant to ancestral mysteries, so the summoning stayed around and grew inside us with our bones, and continued to feed our souls as we became less young. Now we are no longer girls, and the summoning is strong. They call out to us, those old women, as they continue to pass by along the reindeer road. Dear sisters, will you not walk with us? We listen to their gravelly voices, which by now we know so well, and they move into us like frayed cords or aching sighs. It's hard to resist the invitation, especially when the drums start and the oddly textured songs. The reindeer road has always marked a boundary between our two imaginary landscapes, the ghosted outer world of an ancient winter land and the unfolding inner world of our remembering. Now those two worlds are merging. There is no going back. The reindeer road is always with us. And yeah, that's so rich. You know, we've got this idea of readiness as well. You know, like we talked about the memory is definitely something, and layers of time, you know, that, like I said, with the loom clan, we're talking ancient weaving of story. And it's saying that there's an element of readiness that we need. So like even when we're young, we kind of like are unconsciously absorbing these stories, and probably that is also when we sustain those hurts that are inside us. And I love the way it talks about how it's that merging of the two worlds. There's no going back. The reindeer road is always with us. The merging of the two worlds of the outer and the inner. And like it's talking about it as if it's like the kind of the path that's divided by the reindeer road is the kind of wintry terrain, like the actual wintry terrain outside at the end of the world. But then the inner world could be like the safety of the village, but it's also talking about our own inner and outer worlds. And then we've reached a point in our development, in our maturity now, where we need to integrate our inner and our outer worlds so that they make sense, so that they are coherent together. And it's not like our inner world is telling us this, the information and stories and heart of our inner world is this, and the stories and sentiments of and emotions of our outer world is this. That's not going to work for us anymore. You know, we're being called, dear sisters, will you not walk with us? And so what do we do? Like, if we'd received this message, like I talked a lot really about the kind of inner working that I would be doing with this message, but I would also, like I say, be drumming. I'd be looking for stories. I would be perhaps like even taking heed from the temperature. Like each of these stories has a definite kind of temperature to it. So I would be thinking, okay, what is that world, that cold world? How can I kind of bring some of that into my life? And I might do something like maybe like taking an ice bath or cold showers or going for a swim in cold wild water, you know, actually bringing that temperature in. What else might I do? I might kind of think about that terrain. I might do artwork around this, you know, like creating like a kind of wintry landscape. And maybe you could, when you kind of creating different shapes and things out, or you know, in this wintry landscape, I could perhaps be like, oh yeah, that's this that's frozen in ice, and that's this thing that happened to me that I have not dealt with and is frozen in ice. And like all of these stories invite us in to the lineage of the weavers. So by working with these stories, we become the wise women, you know, and we can then pass that wisdom on. So like nearly all of them have that element of like passing on wisdom as well. Once we've done our work, you know, we do our work. And what I love about it is because they, you know, they're all very different, but then there's also lots of crossover with these cards, with these weavers. And like some of them, this one is one that I've worked with, they've got like wax or something on top of that. This is one I find like tricky to work with. You know, this one I loved working with Snake, Dreamer of the Bright Heart. And I have not worked with all of these. Like the one that we pulled today is the example. I have not read this before or worked with this weaver before. This is new. So what I'm saying is like, this is my first impression, and I would definitely, over a period of time, I think it is best when you're first starting to work with these cards, to work with them over a period of time. And that goes like if you've got other oracle decks as well, you know, take your time with them. Sometimes it's not always better. Like we seem to always want, like, I want the answers now, you know, but it's not always better to be just presented with an answer, because that, when we work for something, we value it more and we own it then. We've met it. We're not just like passively just taking it in. You can't passively just take in this deck. You have to do the work with it as well. Should I do one more? Like, this might be getting really long, but maybe we'll just do one quickly and see what else. And like you could make an altar to that card and maybe gather like sort of like cold imagery. You could maybe put a drum there. You could things to do with your heart as well. So like heart, maybe like you could start to monitor your own heart rate, maybe do things to raise your own heart rate. There's definitely like ancestral stuff going on as well. So perhaps you might want to like work with ancestors, like maybe create ancestor altars or put relatives, pictures of your own relatives or representations of those on that altar as well. There's basically like almost unlimited things that you could do with it, and that's what I love. It's not like I've got other decks which I really like for example, you know, this oracle deck, the Sacred Mothers and Goddesses. In here, when you pull a card, it gives you like this is all different goddesses and things in here. So this is Hecate, and it tells you a little bit about her, who she is. and her message, you know, so it gives you, it literally spells it out for you. Have the courage to step into the new and unknown. Know you have the power to co-create with me and that all is happening at the perfect time for your journey. Light and clarity will be provided to enable you to take the right next step. Let go of the idea that they're wrong or right choices or everything is black and white. So do you see what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying that this is wrong or not as valid, you know, sometimes we want this, but it gives you, it's kind of like spoon feeding you a little bit. It's like, I pulled this card and now this is what has come up. And it can make us less inclined to do the work. Whereas with this, we have to do the work. And by kind of filling that gap between what is presented and like where we are, we have to come forward to meet it. It invites us into the work. And yeah, the reason I pulled this one out to show you is because it's very specifically like call on Hecate when, and it gives you like bullet points of that. It also tells you some activities and rituals you might want to do. It gives you a spread that you can use to ask more questions. It tells you how to create an altar, the sort of things like objects, fruits, flowers, herbs, incense and scented oils, stones and crystals you might want to include on that. Wonderful, you know, that's really good information. That is definitely something that when I'm working with my membership, when we're working with different goddesses each month, that I want to provide that for people, but I also want people to step towards it. And I think that is why this deck feels so hard, is because you have to do a lot more work than we have to do with most oracle decks. Let's just very quickly look at this one, Braid, that I pulled out. 31. And I mean, like, working on all different levels. When we think about it, we're working with you know, you're thinking about it on a physical, like what physical changes do I need to make, which might be like creating an altar. It might be I need to be walking around more, I might need to be beating a drum, I might need to be tracking my own heart rate. It might mean I need to be walking to cold places. On a emotional level, it might be like excavating those stuck places. On a mental level, you might be researching like songs and stories that are to do with those kind of icy places, and perhaps even like kind of practical research as well on like kind of dissolving traumas and things like that. And then on the spiritual level, you know, you might be thinking about how can I call on that energy of that weaver, and also on the primordial ice beings to help me as I release this work, you know. So when we think about it like that, we can think about it in a really rich and kind of well-rounded way. So very quickly then, let's just look at Braid, 31 Braid. She's in the Bone clan. So we've got this like idea of bones, of ancestry here. And she's a South Weaver, so we've got that fire element coming through as well. She's an Udigan of the Bear Claw. She strengthens the power of warriors. So before we even read any more of that, we know she is here. She's got a rattle or a drumstick, and she is, if she's strengthening the power of warriors, she's, you know, Udigan of the Bear Claw. It definitely feels a more ferocious energy, a more fiery energy. We're not going to have that cold story that we had in the last with the last one. Let's just look at her yarn. She was a perpetual traveler, constantly moving between communities, always walking a solitary path amid the silent wild wilderness. She preferred to remain outside of the usual and beyond the anticipated. In that respect, her life was a beacon of freedom and greatly inspired many women towards expressing their own extraordinary true natures. On that day, which later everyone came to know as When Women Roared, she walked into the Eastern settlement. So, you know, we're getting this story set up now, you know, the day she walked into the settlement. And most of the stories, most of the yarns are when something meets something else. You know, that's the kind of common thread through lots of these thread. The community was waiting with the women warriors lined up across the clearing. Some injustice and violent intent had pressed perilously close into the well-being of that place, so it was now necessary to empower those who felt vulnerable and to raise a protection around the homes. It was time to make a bear ceremony. She strode into the centre of the gathered dancers and raised her horned drum. A tangle of totems, spirits, dolls and metal discs clattered from its handle, and soon the skin was singing loudly. As the rhythm built, the warriors began to dance, stepping into the trance of that fierce magic. Some dancers stretched out their arms to reveal bear claws gripped between their fingers, which they pointed around the crowd, who cheered and yelled. Some dancers whispered to their own drums as they circled, their attention fused to the demanding rhythms. All the warriors had twisted their hair into tight braids, in which they wore hair bones laced with stones. The white male stones and the blue female stones swung with the reeling bodies, creating a dance of perfect balance. The dancers began to call upon the forest bear to protect them, and sang the cold words that had been given to them by the mothers of their mothers. They were reshaping the whole world with their music and pulling clarity into their song. "We'll cross the snowfields to where the blue ice pours," they sang, "where we will find freedom of spirit to carry back to the daughters of our daughters." All day and all night the women warriors and the horned drummer summoned the forest bear. But would she come? As dawn approached, a dark roar echoed from the ice cliffs. The drums fell silent and the dancing stopped. Everyone listened while the sound drew nearer. There was a ferocious spirit coming close to the camp, but it was soon apparent that it was not the forest bear. So strong was the magic that the women had made with their dance, now the mighty ice bear herself had answered their call. As she reached the dancing ground, her fearsome power encircled the warriors, and her raw strength released the wings inside their hearts. The women roared, and that roar would be remembered always, should anyone ever think to do those women wrong. So this is much more about, standing up for your own power. It's about calling on those ancient powers to be within us and supporting us. So like this card would most likely come out when there is injustice, when there has been boundaries violated. And so by pulling this card, it gives you that strength to summon up that bear claw and to stand your ground. So I won't read all this bit as well, because, it's kind of, hopefully I've demonstrated fairly well like what it is I do with these cards. I haven't given maybe you were thinking this is going to be like practical tips, like, oh, you could do this, you could do this. I did make a post about this actually over in the Facebook group where I shared some of the ways I worked with it. Maybe I could pin that, and if people have got other ideas they want to add, then do that. And also please in the comments, like if you work with this deck, or if you work with hard, like tricky to understand oracle decks in general, what are some of the ways in that you have found, and how do you like to work with them? Like, do you like to use more than one card at a time, or do you tend to work with one at a time? Like I said, I'm working for this year for the first time with this council of 12 elders from this deck, which is, that way I'm getting a different, like a kind of spread. It is a council, like the word council just kind of came when I drew them. I was like, oh, I have a council of weavers this year. Yeah. So anyway, I hope that is helpful, and yeah, let me know what you think. And if you've got any other ideas, tips and things to share, then please do share them. That is the wonderful thing about having this community here, that we can do that. We can share our knowledge, our wisdom with each other. Thank you so much for being here. Warmest blessings, and I will see you very soon.